Now, we are moving to the second keynote speech of the program by Professor Stephen Marshall. He is a professor of urban morphology and urban design at the Bartlett School of Planning, UCL. We know him well with his seminal books like Street and Patterns and Cities, Design and Evolution, in addition to his recent articles, which opened up brand new discussions on urban design theory and practice. Now, we kindly invite Professor Marshall to the floor.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and I hope you don't mind holding out for coffee for a little longer. First, thank you very much for the invitation to come here. My talk is called Urban Design Dialogues with Science and Art, a slightly different topic from what was originally presented. I would say the dialogues part I would like to credit partly our discussions I've had with Olga before, and we've discussed these issues of science and art over a few years in dialogue, I suppose. So this helped crystallize some ideas that I wanted to bring to you today. Okay, so the starting point, I suppose, is came out of considering where is urban design going, what's the state of the field, and so on. The uncertainty over the professional and academic status of urban design, critiques of urban design as a pseudoscience and as an art, whether we should have, whether urban design should be a science or an art or and so on. Jane Jacobs' critique, probably people are familiar with. She says, as in the pseudoscience of bloodletting, just so in the pseudoscience of city rebuilding and planning, years of learning and a plethora of subtle and complicated dogma have arisen on a foundation of nonsense. So she said that quite strongly back in the 1960s. I suspect that we still have quite a lot of complicated dogma, and whether or not it's a foundation of nonsense or not, I think it's probably worth trying to find out. We also have Alexander Cuthbert's critique from 2007. The details are there, where, to sum it up very crudely, he more or less single-handedly demolishes traditional urban design theory over a 50-year period, criticizing it for being insubstantial and anarchic. So this would make anyone think, pause for thought, especially urban design theorists, as to what is happening here. Our business is being under threat or being attacked perhaps from within and perhaps sympathetically for those who care about urban design. So it seems to be something worthy of consideration. So I happen to be writing something about evidence. I was invited to write something about evidence-based urban design. So I ended up writing a paper called Science, Pseudoscience and Urban Design, which is published in, you might not be able to read it, but Urban Design International in 2012. I gave a few talks on relating loosely to this topic, which got quite interesting responses from people in the audiences. Also, a paper came out by Kim Dovey and Alec Pathka earlier this year, which was in part response to this paper. I also wrote a paper on art, the kind of art urban design is, which was published recently in July in the Journal of Urban Design. And the editor, Tanner Ott, who's on the scientific committee here, invited some other commentators to write short pieces on this, which are published in the same issue from July. And I also wrote another paper in the Urban Design Planning Journal, which actually it kind of followed on from the train of thought in the Journal of Urban Design paper, but it was actually published earlier, and so it wasn't part of the critique or the reflections. I just realized, of course, when I came into this room that the slides, some of the text is quite dark on here, so I hope to distill the more important points so that you don't need to read them. Anyway, my talk today then is picking up on these themes. So roughly 4 quarters, urban design and science, followed by the dialogue with science, and then urban design and art, and then dialogue following that relation to art. So, first of these then, urban design and science, the quotation from Orhan Pamuk there. I read a book one day and my whole life was changed. So we don't know what kind of book it was. Maybe it was a science book, maybe it was a novel, who knows. So urban design, what is urban design? Or the role of urban design theory in relation to science. So let's say urban design is assumed to be supported by a scientific underpinning. But is urban design theory itself scientific? So just let's see if I can use this. So this shows the art and practice of urban design is sort of built on a kind of plinth of urban design theory, perhaps, which is grounded in perhaps a scientific underpinning down into the bedrock there. So I started then exploring, well, what is science and what is pseudoscience? So pseudoscience can be applied in different ways. It can be applied to individuals, it can be applied to particular theories, and it can be applied to a whole field, perhaps astrology, for example. A whole field can be categorized in those terms. And there are also different ways of being pseudoscientific. It doesn't necessarily just mean it's something that's fraudulent or completely wrong or fundamentally implausible. It can also mean, in the third case, a post hoc justification for a form of practice that could proceed even without the theory. And the fourth one is where the treatment appears to be scientific, where it may involve a method or approach or general mindset that appeals to observation and experiment. So it appears to be scientific, but which nevertheless does not come up to the scientific standards. So pseudoscience can even happen when we have good intentions, or maybe even to things that are trying to be scientific and fail, as opposed to things that never even attempted to be scientific in the first place. So in researching into this paper, I thought I'd scrutinize some classic urban design theory texts that I thought was pretty sure that most people would agree with were classics and foundational treatises in urban design theory. They had stood the test of time for 40, 50 or so years. So these are Kevin Lynch's The Image of the City, Townscape by Gordon Cullen, Cities Not a Tree by Chris Alexander, and Jane Jacobs' Death and Life of American Cities. So I tried to distill down what their key hypotheses were, and was slightly surprised to find, this is the joy of science, I suppose, if we call it science, you don't always know what the answer is before you start. And I was slightly surprised to find that it was difficult to say whether their core hypotheses were actually true. I'm talking here about the specific hypothesis that I kind of tried to interpret, distill. In other words, are Kevin Lynch's 5 elements really definitive of public image in precisely the way he suggested? Is the art of relationship that Gordon Cullen claimed, is it really deliver the experiential effects that he claimed? Jane Jacobs, surprisingly, perhaps on rereading it, I found there's actually a great big hypothesis right in the middle of the book. She has these 4 conditions that she says explicitly must all be together. They all together must be work in operation for her hypothesis to be true. And I found, to my surprise in a sense, that there was actually a very scientific mindset behind the book. But I found it wasn't necessarily ever very clear how or to what extent this had ever been proven. And in Chris Alexander's paper, he has a hypothesis about a semilattice, and it wasn't really clear that anyone had ever actually tested whether this was actually true. And what I concluded in a sense was, it's not just that we don't know whether a particular theory or hypothesis is true or not, but urban design as a field doesn't even seem interested. It doesn't seem, and we're all guilty to some extent, I think. We read books, we assimilate the knowledge, we write about them, we cite these people, we cite ourselves. We're all guilty. But are we sure that these are still true, or if they ever were true, after 40, 50 years? And let me be clear here, it's not so much that the individual theories are pseudoscientific. Some people think I'm saying that these theorists are pseudoscientific. What I'm concentrating on is that the field as a whole, if we are a field, doesn't insist that the scientific, empirical, evidential basis for its theories underpinning assumptions are correct, consistent, and up to date. In other words, we're happy to kind of build up theories, and we've got a whole set of books that we love and we refer to. And if Alexander fits our argument, we use Alexander. And if Alexander doesn't fit, we might use Jacobs. So on. But can they all be true? Are they all consistent? Do we ever throw away theories? Do we ever update them sufficiently? The number of people, and again, some of us are guilty of this, the number of people who will just cite back to Jacobs in 1961 without citing the latest paper on someone who's actually tested it last year or 2 or 3 years ago. It's a kind of, perhaps intellectual laziness that urban design, well, at least academics may tend to fall into. Okay, so going back to this diagram, we find out that in a sense that urban design theory is perhaps a bit of a black box. It's assumed that the urban design theory is true or is scientific, but perhaps it isn't necessarily so. We don't necessarily know. Does this matter? You might say. Some people say, well, urban design isn't science, but if we as urban design theorists, if we don't fix this, then someone else will. There are probably plenty of scientists out there, physicists who've got a bit of time in their hands, who can crunch some numbers and who can theorize about cities themselves and might end up, quite happily come up with their own theories of urbanism, but that might also lack some of the subtleties that generations of urban designers have brought into the field. So, back to the paper. I don't have time to talk about all the things in the paper, but I did suggest some ways forward for urban design in front of research and education and in practice. But my main conclusions, I suppose, were, well, firstly, is urban design pseudoscientific? Well, I would say at least in part, we have to say that. But as a field, that is. The implication is the need not just for saying we need more and better science. I mean, I could have said that at the beginning, and anyone could maybe agree that we could do with more and better science. But more specifically, that we need more systematic verification and critical assimilation of scientific knowledge within urban design theory. We need to make sure that if we're inventing our own urban design theories, they have sufficient up-to-date knowledge in them. And if we were to do this, then perhaps we could it could help support the idea of urban design as being an academic discipline or a profession, and not just like a general sort of field of knowledge falling in between other fields of knowledge. So that was the paper then. It was published in 2012, as I say. So now I move on to the sort of dialogue part and the reaction following from it. And I might try and walk around at this part. So the responses then, I don't know if you can see the wording there, but I started a paper or something, and people say, but Jane Jacobs, Jane Jacobs can't be wrong. I mean, we know all her work, she brilliant arguments. Surely people have been working on Jane Jacobs' work for decades. And people say, don't be knocking Chris Alexander. He's a good guy. He's a scientist. You can't possibly accuse him of being pseudoscientific. Actually, I didn't say Alexander was pseudoscientific. I said people say, a lot of people seem to have an attitude of, how dare you criticize our heroes, but hero worship is not the way of science, I mean, these Death and Life of Great American Cities are a great read, and it's a great foundational text in the mindset of planners and struggle against the forces of evil, but it's not, it doesn't mean it's a forever truth. And in a sense, the reaction I had to the paper, in a sense, proved the paper. I mean, the reaction to the paper seemed to convince me that actually urban design, at least the audiences I've spoken to, weren't treating urban design theory in a scientific way. direction was actually implying that, that people were treating more as being outside of scientific scrutiny and not requirement. I also get this kind of question as well. Yes, but what about social science? And I always tend to think, well, what about? I wouldn't necessarily claim to be a social scientist here for my sins, but what about? You never said anything about social science. People say, well, as I say, if social science is a science or is a sciences, then everything I've said should apply to it. If it really is a proper science, then what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about should apply to it, and we shouldn't have any argument. And if you think that social science isn't science, then, well, maybe it's up to you to justify why the social sphere falls outside of normal science. What is it about Homo sapiens that gives us a privileged position that we can stand outside of science and not be subject to the scrutiny of science? There's also another view, we might call it a scientific view, which has, in this case, a kind of classic. So lone artist working easily, because you can't see this dark image. Saying, well, urban design isn't a science, and shouldn't be, and shouldn't attempt to be. And I'm quite relaxed about that. I never said urban design was a science. I think in theory it can be supported as science. But I think it's entirely coherent and legitimate to say that science is a separate thing, and the urban design can do its own thing. That's fine. But I think there's also a kind of attitude that I would call perhaps an anti-scientific attitude that actually seems to be out to get science, to say science is not a good thing, it's something somehow wrong and dangerous, that we should seek alternative ways of knowing somehow, that science doesn't provide all the answers, and it's more important to ask questions. And that's fine to have as a critical attitude, although science doesn't claim to have all the answers. Science is a way of testing ideas, finding out evidence, and if your answers are wrong, we'll replace them. Replace them with a better answer. It's a way of advancing knowledge. I mean, I think the alternative is in danger of suggesting we abandon the quest for more knowledge, and we just sort of sit around philosophizing about what we think about the world. Something like that. I'm slightly exaggerating at this point, but I think it's something that we need to think about. So I don't have time to give a proper critical review of Dovey and Pathka's paper, but towards almost in the last paragraph, they say knowledge for Socrates was found not in the fixed outcomes of a debate, but in its very modes of contestation and questioning, in the way the new questions opens up, in overcoming the illusions of certainty. Knowledge is to be found in understanding that we do not know. And they say at the end by saying urban design it falls into this category. And in fact, Socrates here said, I cannot teach anyone anything. I can only make them think. So I wonder if this is a good strategy to go into our lectures and say, well, I cannot teach you anything today, but I hope to make you think. But I would also say, well, why regress to Socrates? I mean, sorry, I'm not knocking Socrates, but when you can have Aristotle, and I'm being very, very, very simplistic here, but by Aristotle, I mean the advancement brought in by science, scientific method that Aristotle added beyond Socrates' critical thinking. The idea that, yes, Socrates brought in critical thinking and said we don't know anything. But Aristotle came along and said, well, let's look at the world and do some science. And sometimes he was wrong, often he was wrong. We can look back and say he was wrong in many things. But he was part of extending knowledge. And it's only because knowledge was extended that we look back and see the things that were wrong. So my conclusion on urban design and science is, so I think that urban design can be more scientific. Or it could be ascientific if we want it to be purely an art or something like that. That's fine by me. I would say that being more scientific is to be encouraged in the sense of, I think, our urban design theories, why not take advantage of that science can bring? Why not be more make sure that our theories are more solidly grounded and be more valid, and to learn from the way, the scientific mindset. Why not? And as I say, if urban design theorists don't do this, then perhaps others will, and maybe urban design theorists will be out of a job. I think it's something we need to think about. I would also say that a pseudo-scientific view I don't think is necessarily helpful, and I don't think the anti-scientific voices are necessarily helpful in the sense of sometimes people will say, oh, we don't want science, but then don't replace it with anything. Like if there was a better way, then let's hear it, let's advance knowledge that way, and that's fine. And I know that there are arguments about there are other ways of thinking, so let's hear what they are, and let's use those too. Okay, so the next thing, I'm going to take a sip of water here. And the next thing is urban design and art. And it says here, in case you can't read it, if I see my city as beautiful and bewitching, then my life must be so too. So the problem here is we have charges of the idea of urban design as an art. There are charges of elitism, top-down domination of the artist mentality, monumentalism, self-indulgence, frivolity, capricious symbolism, top-down imposition, political incorrectness, serving capitalist hegemony, and irrelevance in the face of more pressing concerns of humanity. So there's a kind of chorus of writers who criticize the artistic view of urban design, let's say. And I have to admit, I was one of them. I've said this before. In previous publications, I've criticized, perhaps more specifically, the idea of a city as a work of art. I think we need to be very careful. What is the point of this? Do we want to be living in a work of art and so on? So I include myself. I'm partly skeptical about the idea of how far we can take art. But that's the general problem that the art of urban design faces. There's another problem, in a sense, crystallized by Ian Bentley, which was, the problem is not that design professionals often think of themselves as artists. The problem lies rather in the kinds of artists that they feel themselves to be. And this perhaps reflects this traditional classical image of perhaps possibly a Western Renaissance-oriented artist, the lone artist in their room, dreaming up ideas that are then somehow imposed on the rest of the world. But as we know, urban design isn't painting, it's not sculpture, and it's not performance art. Ian Bentley discusses the possibilities of likening it to performance art, but it may be like performance art, but it isn't in essence performance art. But this doesn't mean that it isn't an art, or wouldn't benefit for being treated more seriously as an art. Like, if we're going to do the art thing, why not do it properly? Or let's think more detail about what it means to be an art. So I ended up writing a paper. This actually came out of when I was writing the science paper. I was thinking, well, science isn't the whole story, and people will think me a Philistine or something, or a technocrat, all that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, let's see this art side of things. So I looked into the art side of things, and ended up writing this paper called "The Kind of Art Urban Design Is." So the paper scrutinizes different definitions and classifications of arts. It goes into takes a couple of existing ways of analysing art, from Vogt, the analysis of definitions of art, and from Lalo, different classifications of art, and try to interpret these in relation to urban design. In case you're wondering, this here is a statue in Glasgow, which Ali's paper reminds me of, the presentation reminded me of. So this statue has a cone, it's got a cone in its head. So this is a bit of pop-up urbanism. In fact, this cone has appeared on the head of this man, this statue, for many, many years. As long as I can remember, this cone has appeared. In fact, during this time, the cone has been it keeps being removed by the police, and it gets put back up again by an anonymous artist or artists. In fact, they sometimes put the cone on the head of the horse as well. So you can sometimes find pictures with the cone on both the head of the horse and the Duke of Wellington. And in fact, the building behind it, Tony Hall was talking about changing the land uses. The building behind it subsequently became a museum of modern art. So quite gloriously, the Glasgow Museum of Modern Art now has this pop-up artwork in front of it, which is more permanent in a sense than the museum so far. And also in terms of city branding, since Ali was talking about it, I'm doing a slight digression here. In a recent Commonwealth Games sporting event, some other artists used this cone as a symbol of Glasgow in the kind of image making of Glasgow as a place where, you know, slightly irreverent, where arty things happen and so on and so on. So there are different kinds of art, right? This is my main point, I suppose. There are different kinds of art, and urban design can be one of those. I mean, I did do some, as I say, I know you can't read that, but I want to just show that there are some tables in there that go into some of the bigger sort of classifications and classificatory territory there. But also, what kind of art is urban design then, and how does it relate to other art? So we've got a bit of architecture here. There's a sculpture here, or an atlas holding up a figure here holding up this building. So these elements are at different scales. This gargoyle, if you like, is part of the urban scene. It's part of the architecture. It's part of the urban design. And yet, sculpture is different from. I think we would agree, sculpture is a different discipline from architecture, and similarly urban design. So urban design is different from architecture, but it has similarities and so on. So we can study the similarities and differences between different kinds of art and so on. And you know, you might ask the question, well, where does architecture stop and urban design or landscape architecture start? And of course, in the space just outside here, I think it's a really nice illustration of that. When you're standing outside by the fish pond there, you know, where this kind of architecture is all around us. The landscape flows through the space, and in a sense, the campus itself could be seen as a work of urban design. So. Although I'm not an architect, and although I don't go in deeply into architectural theory or landscape architecture, I think from an urban design point of view, I think it's very clear that there is a blurring and a blending of urban design into architecture. Although when we look at the extremes, we can see there are differences in the extremes, but they do come together, I would argue. Well, there are various analyses here. In this case, I sort of separated out what I call the kindred arts, architecture, landscape architecture, and garden design, and interior design as being quite close to urban design in several ways. And then some more sort of proximate arts that it shared some of the characteristics of urban design. So painting, sculpture being visual, but also performance art, as Bentley mentions, scenography, cartography, and many other kinds of design, sort of artful design, can also be related to urban design. And then just about any other kind of art in the third category that has very little in common with urban design or each other. They're all different things. And without going into all the details here, in the paper I discuss, suggest ways in which there are these overlaps and distinctions between basically different kinds of media, tactics or effects, and different purposes and functions and meanings. And so the urban design sits, comfortably within the realm of, we might call them architectural arts or arts of place, that includes architecture and landscape architecture. So the conclusion from that paper then was, urban design can be considered an art. It can be defined as art, depending how we define art, depending how we define urban design. So it's possible. This doesn't mean it should be like or is a painting or a sculpture, or that we should approach urban design with that kind of artistic mentality. I think it can be usefully identified as being, in a sense, kindred with architecture and landscape architecture. And also there are different kinds of art of urban design. So just as there are different kinds of arts of landscape and architecture and so on, there are different. We can be loose about this. We can say, well, there are different kinds of urban design. There are different kinds of art. There are different kinds of art of urban design. So I'm not trying to impose a particular single model or a straitjacket on it. I think it's up to the profession itself and to actual urban designers to come to those conclusions. In this sense, I'm just here as a theorist, as an onlooker, as an academic, setting out what I think the territory is, but I mean, urban designers, you who are urban designers, can make decisions about how you think of your own art, of course. But I think the challenge becomes how to articulate this so-called collective meaning for the urban design case. So if the art object, or what's quasi-object that we were talking about yesterday, if the product is something that somehow has to have some kind of meaning, then we need to think in terms of an urban product, what kind of product that would be, what kind of meaning that would have, how can it be a collective meaning, and how can we imbue it with that meaning, and who's we, who is the urban designer, and does it involve any of us as citizens, as the public, and so on, could be contributing. And of course art could include guerrilla art, urban knitting, all these things that Ali was talking about earlier. Many of these phenomena can be seen as works of art, and they can be insurgent and participatory and so on. At least that's how I see it. So, okay, so as I said, so this paper was then published with a series of 4 or 5 commentary pieces, very short pieces that are bound into the same issue of the journal. So again, I'm not going to go do a full academic critique of them as such, but I want to sort of just reflect some of the arguments to show the room for debate that we have. So some, well, I mean, not all of the papers are completely critical. Some of them go off and discuss art in their own ways. For their own authors talk about their own perspectives of art, and that's absolutely fine. So, and anyone might say, well, look, this is just one view of art. There are lots of other views, and of course, I'm happy to agree with that. And certainly in the limits of academic publishing. A journal has a limit. A journal paper has a limit on it. You can only say so much. So I accept that each of us can only bring part of the story, and there are many more perspectives out there, some of which are presented in this issue. Then we had, in effect, a kind of Emily Taylin wrote a short piece where she said, but look, these architects are still too preoccupied with their own expressions of art. This is a paraphrase. I'm not even sure they're listening. So this is the idea that you can see these architects are still easily drawing alone, facing the other way, drawing up their artistic urban designs and so on. And interestingly, she suggests that maybe the planner is better placed to take the lead. Maybe the planner, and of course she's written about art and town planning, maybe the planner is in a better position to articulate the citizenry and the participant aspect of art. And I think it's an interesting argument, but to be honest, I haven't followed enough of the link between art and planning. Even though I'm in the planning school, I haven't really followed up that with the kind of the planners, the real planners, if you like. But that's part of an ongoing dialogue. And then we have Alexander Cuthbert, who says more or less that the urban design, he doesn't say these exact words, but several of the words are words he does use. But more or less he's saying the urban designer as an artist is in danger of being fetishistic, sycophantic, elitist, and unnecessary extravagance, and only serving the interests of capitalist hegemony. Well, you can actually say capitalist hegemony, but the general tone is what he's getting at, and of course the urban designer, I think, is this am I a fetishist? Am I a capitalist hegemony? Is our whole discipline unnecessary? Maybe it is. So, I mean, let me be clear, this is all part of what we're interested in learning, self-critical discipline. Maybe we are. Maybe we're doing the wrong thing. And the other one, if you can see, it says, I'm glad I'm a humble Philistine. So, actually there's some training in engineering, so at certain points in this course I might sort of stand aside and go, it's okay, you can't be talking about me, I'm an engineer, I'm not an artist, or trying to presume the powers of the artist. Although in this case I'm obviously commenting on it as an urban design theorist, I suppose, if I have to attach a label. And he also says, so urban, and he does say this, he says, urban design is not and should not be an art. He says, no more Michelangelos, no more art. And that's the title of this piece. Yeah, as I say, it's powerful rhetoric, it's a good title for an academic piece which we're drawn to read it. And it's all part of the discourse, and it's all welcome as part of the discourse. However, I would say, I would say that it's too narrow a view of art. I mean, I think if you thought art was just a capitalist hegemonic artist sitting by the easel and drawing the wings of a bird and expecting someone to build a city in the shape of the wings of a bird, then yeah, I get that. But I think there are many kinds of art of all sorts, and I think it's a much too narrow view of art, I think, just to write off the whole art in that way. I think art can be humble, critical, insurgent, emergent, participatory, and emancipatory. I think it can be, and so too can urban design, even the art of urban design. Why not, one might think. I mean, it's almost as if saying that because some architects serve power, there should be no more architects. Like maybe we should just leave the design to engineers, Like an engineer who designed this building, put in the beams there, put in concrete, might not put in that bit over there in the wall. You have to buy an architect there. Engineers who design buildings, we could just have building design, but not the art of architecture. Is that what we're saying? Because art is an unnecessary extravagance. Is that what we're saying? Can art not somehow enrich the lives of everyone, including the poorest? I mean, art isn't necessarily the most important thing if you're in need. As people say, you can't eat art unless it's edited art. But are we really saying that the benefits of art can't be shared around or could be done in such a way? Urban design is such a public art. Can we not do urban design in a way that can benefit all the citizens, as many of the citizens as we like, and not just those in power? I mean, I think it seems naive to me to imagine that disbanding architecture, for example, as an art, would solve the politics. If it's not an architect designing, a residential palace or something, then maybe an engineering firm would do it. Those firms aren't going to go away, I would suggest. And in a sense, politics is a separate issue. It's not completely separate, but I think we need to be clear what we're doing at any particular point in time. In other words, politics sometimes needs a political solution, I would suggest. But of course, we can think about politics when we're making our urban design solutions. Of course, all of these things are open to debate. But I don't think we can wholly rely on solving our political problems by simply removing an artistic sensibility from the design disciplines. I mean, are we really saying that we shouldn't aspire to creating artfully designed places? The spaces outside here don't benefit from having some kind of artistic thought and craft put into them, I would argue. So, as it happens, I had developed these arguments further, although they were published in a paper of this title that actually was published before the other one. And in this paper, so just to come back, a final argument, counter-argument to those counter-arguments, if you like. So I'm suggesting that urban design can be seen as an integrative art in the way that architecture integrates between structural engineering, heating, lighting, social spaces, and so on. The architect tries to bring all those together. So in a sense, urban design does the same, also adding in landscape, transportation, public spaces, and so on. But we can also see the purpose of the art. In a sense, it's been said that the purpose of architecture is the articulation of place. If so, then urban design can also be seen in such a way. And the paper goes on to suggest a possible agenda for that. And in doing so, calls for suggesting, well, why don't we learn more about art, which then the other paper goes back to think about, to deepen our understanding of place. What kind of place is it we're trying to create, or who's trying to create it? More specific education and training towards the artistic side, and also to establish the limits of our urban design and the limits of the art of urban design. So in a sense, I'm happy to question that. I'm not just saying we must have art uncritically, but in what circumstances should we employ this specialist art? What is the legitimate domain of the art of urban design? And to what level should the art of urban design be applied at? Or more broadly, to what level of scale should any holistic design project be attempted? If you're trying to design a whole city as a work of art, it becomes something perhaps totalitarian or more difficult to justify in terms of who's designing what for whom. It seems fine to have the art at the scale of the building. Maybe a city's too much, but maybe it's some scale in between. How do we mediate that, and how does that relate to the social and political dimensions? So my conclusion on urban design and art. So I'm saying that urban design is most usefully defined in a way that recognises it as an art, just as we do with architecture. And this doesn't mean that all, or even most, urbanism needs to be achieved via the art of urban design, just as not all buildings need to be designed by architects. But I think if we're going to have a meaningful sort of discipline, then I think we can think along these lines. This kind of art need not be elitist, but can or should be participatory, emancipatory, socially just, etc. And maybe if it can't be, it shouldn't be an art, or it shouldn't be done. But those are, in a sense, political arguments, and we don't need to. I'm not suggesting that we remove our political sensibilities. And in a sense, we need a richer take or a better understanding of art, and also of the places that we're trying to create, and also the society that interfaces with that. So I'm not suggesting throwing away the social sensibility. Okay, so I'm coming to a conclusion. It's all right. So just a few more slides. So I'm suggesting more attention to both science and art seems to me possible and desirable. Why not? We're in the track of time, we're ephemeral pop-up academics. While we've got the influence and the power, why not let's try and do something? A more dedicated art of urban design, perhaps a more dedicated scientific approach to urban design. Surely these can enhance and reinforce urban design as an academic and professional field. I think we should. Why not aim higher? Why not think? Why give up? Why not just say, well, I can't, just because you or I can't imagine an art of urban design, why can't we imagine it? Or if we can't imagine a scientific way of doing something, of understanding something, why not let's do it? Or let's encourage others to do it, those with the skills, and not just say urban design can't be done scientifically. So also, this is just an emerging conclusion. I haven't thought about this too much, but I thought I'd throw it in anyway. I suspect that some critics are in danger of colouring their judgment by a kind of critical political prerogative that unnecessarily throws away the benefits of art and science without replacing it with anything so constructive. As I say, if you've got a constructive alternative, let's hear it. Let's start building it. If social science is a proper science, it needn't be conflated with a particular political agenda. If it is actual science, it's better to conflate it with actual science. It's in danger of becoming co-opted to serve a political agenda, and sometimes in danger of being pseudoscience. I would suggest is a danger. Similarly, if art is interpreted with an open mind, it needn't be conflated with bad politics and politically incorrect serving capitalist hegemony, etc., etc. And the political agenda is in danger of being sort of a bit of philistine, just discouraging us from attaining for urban design being as rich as it can be. So, almost the last slide. My conclusion here is that we should advance both art and science. So we've got this guy representing art, this guy with the compasses representing science. But in this dialogue, which has got Socrates and Silesia, who's a lady from Anatolia, by the way. So we've got female voices in here as well. We've got dialogue, and in a sense, the arts and science are a service of the political or the communal view. So the arts and the science can serve political purposes. So, you know, we don't need to divorce them from those, but they can serve them. But it's not to say that they should it's not to say that the science should be mixed in with politics. Do good science and then use it for your purpose. And finally, we advance through dialogue, not dogma. So it's because we discuss these things and we put things into perspective and other people criticize and people help and so on. It's because of that it sharpens our arguments, it makes us think more, and we end up with a longer paper or another paper, and then the next person takes it on. And in fact, you know, we're all involved. And everything here, where we can all discuss it, we're all part of the dialogue, and we can all take it forward together. So,
Thank you, Professor Marshall, for your speech. We thank you for your attention. Now, I would like to invite you all for the 15 minutes coffee break. After the coffee break, we will proceed the program in the Faculty of Architecture.